Welcome to Sysfore Retail Educational Webinar Series. Greetings from Team Sysfore. I am Ajit George, co-founder and director at Sysfore, hosting today's webinar. A very good afternoon to all our participants from the Middle East, India, and Far East. We are quite overwhelmed by the response we've got for this webinar. Sysfore planned today's webinar session based on the continuous feedback we've been getting from our customers on the challenges they faced in choosing the right retail ERP. Couple of points to remember. This webinar session is split into three parts. Part 1, introduction and general information, which I am currently doing. Part 2, the main presentation on today's topic. And Part 3, the question and answer session. Kindly note you can type in your questions anytime during this webinar. We have planned around 15 minutes towards the end of the session for that. You are not the only participant in this webinar, as you can see only yourself in the list. That is something which is controlled by the host. To avoid interference, we have muted all the participants' microphone. For any additional information on this webinar or Sysfore solutions, kindly check our website www.sysforeretail.com or email us at info@sysforeretail.com. Once again, we thank you all for joining and we appreciate your interest on this webinar series. Now let me quickly introduce our speaker of the day, Ms. Pinky Ganti. She's a retail industry expert who has worked with the retailers as well as the retail solution providers. She brings a wide range of retail expertise, varying from setting up retail chains, defining and optimizing operations, implementing retail solutions for the various retail customers in India and globally. In her capacity as a retail consultant, she has worked with the large retail ERPs to smaller retail solutions. Let me welcome Pinky to this session. Over to you, Pinky. Thank you.
All right. So, first of all, let us start with the business realities of today. Retail business is challenging, and this is like you'll say, duh. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows this. But still, let's just quickly run through what are the key aspects that retailers face in the current market scenario. So, ever-growing operational expenses and rising real estate costs, as well as constant capital requirement for growth and expansion. This makes this whole business extremely capital intensive. So constantly people are facing the crunch of money. There are not enough capital to invest, and moreover, the whole competitive scenario makes the profits as well ever shrinking, because the costs cannot go up very high because I have to compete in the market. My marketplace is so dynamic. The customers are not really loyal. Anybody who is offering them even 5 rupees less, they would just move on. So keeping all that in mind, and plus, especially right now from an Indian scenario perspective, the opening up of FDI has further, made it more competitive with the entry of so many foreign retailers coming in. This makes it quite challenging to remain competitive and yet remain profitable, and also to keep up on the expansion path for especially for the mid and small retailers. So there are many things that one would need to do to overcome these challenges. And one of the things that can make a difference is the right ERP. What can it bring to table if I have the right ERP solution? It can actually help me establish operational efficiency, which is extremely important, especially from a profitability point of view. Since I cannot really keep hiking up my prices, one of the things that will be very important to make me profitable, to bring down my costs. And how do I bring down my costs? One of the key ways of doing that would be to be efficient operationally, to try and keep my expenses to minimum, have as less manpower as possible, etc. Similarly, another very important aspect which a right ERP can enable for me is visibility to the right data, which will enable me to make the strategic decisions at the right time. Uh, because at the end of it all, how much inventory I hold, what are the kind of customer requirements, etc. The visibility to that is very, very important for to enable me to make strategic decisions. Moreover, customer centricity also extremely important in today's day when the service levels are increasing more and more. It is extremely important to keep in mind what the customer needs are, what it is that their demands are, and to keep up with them. All these points on a very broad level would help me stay competitive while still being profitable. Also, now taking the same thing, a little further and expanding on it, the right ERP should ideally be a partner in growth for me. If we need to define it in a single sentence, so what are the key benefits that an ERP could bring? It can actually completely automate my business. It can bring with it the right kind of processes which are completely in keeping with the industry best practices as well as standards, and it can help me run my business along those lines. Moreover, it will actually ideally remove a lot of manual intervention, which tends to, fragment the whole business practices within the organization. Similarly, if it's a flexible solution, it will help me completely, it will partner me in my growth by uh, changing with the time, keeping in mind the requirements of the surroundings both from business as well as customer perspective, and it will enable me to move fast and respond faster to the requirements. Apart from that, it should ideally also bring along with it, as I already mentioned, the industry best practices. It should help me benchmark myself to the industry standards. It should allow my people to become more efficient with their working, and extremely critical also would be the detailed reporting and audit chains, which is essentially giving me the visibility to my business. Now, this is something which an ERP must and should do. Give me visibility to my business so that I know where I'm spending, how much I'm spending, am I making the right decisions, am I keeping the right inventory, am I having the right assortment, is my location right? How would I know all this? Only if my ERP gives me the right data visibility. Now, coming to your retail specific ERP versus a generic ERP, because even before we jump into the more details, this is a question that needs to be addressed because there are all kinds of ERP available in the market. I could either look at generic ones, which are not really, which don't come with inbuilt retail processes, versus the ERP solutions which have been built specifically for retail. Some of the benefits that a retail specific ERP would bring along with it is, since it is already pre built with retail specific processes, I do not need to sit and design my own ERP. Moreover, it can actually bring in the industry best practices since they have kept already studied what's the requirement of the industry from the various segment perspective, and these are already inbuilt. Similarly, all the benchmarks, etc., have been taken into account. Moreover, it will also allow me to have a quicker deployment cycle because I do not need to now sit and design my ERP solution. It has already done most of the work. All I now need to see is what is the fitment to my current business requirement. And if there is any change, I do the change and then I run with it. Moreover, it also allows me to have a phased approach to implementation because since it is retail specific, all the modules, etc., are already pre built to fit my business requirements as a retailer. And what it can do is, at the moment, for example, if I want to just go with, say, my store solution and then look at the merchandising solution, it will allow me to do that. I do not need to go for the entire pack with the word go. This will also help me budget myself better in terms of I can have a staggered budgeting. I do not need to get into an upfront investment on day one and subsequently hedge my risks because I can always start small, see if the solution fits my business, and then I can always expand further and take on more modules if I find that it is actually useful and fits my business well. Moreover, another very important part here is that since it is retail specific, the responsibility of the upgrade path largely is with the solution provider, because they to keep the solution current, they are typically going to keep understanding the changing environment from the business as well as technology perspective, upgrade the solution, and I can actually get the ready upgrades instead of me having to worrying about always keeping up with the changing business and technology environment and having to do the entire hard work myself. uh, Having said that, let's first very briefly try to understand what the typical components of a retail ERP would look like, what it should ideally, at least at the minimum, give me. So the core components of a retail ERP would be the POS, which is the point of sale, which allows me to run all my store operations, both from the front end as well as back end perspective. So this should ideally have a point of sale as well as back office. Point of sale is the front ending, which is what the cashier would typically be using, whereas back office is something that enables a store manager to control the operations within the store, such as cash flows, day ending processes, day beginning processes, as well as some amount of control towards attendance, etc. Then on the at the central level, very very important from a retailer's perspective is merchandise operations management. This is ultimately the center or the focus of all my operations, right? So this will allow me to define what items I'm going to stock, what is the kind of assortment that I would define, what is the kind of pricing if I want to do multiple pricing. So all my price management as well as my promotions management, if I want to run promotions, all my ordering, purchase order, etc., will all be controlled from here. All my merchandise operations would be controlled from here. Apart from this, if I have a warehouse, then I would also need a warehouse management system, which would keep in track my inventory as well as all my replenishments to the store. It would also help me obviously manage my replenishments at the center as well. So these are all the core modules that are definitely required. Of course, one can again take a staggered approach to this, but yes, in the long run, this is something that is definitely required. All this has to be backed up from a very necessity point of view with finance and HR, ultimately. And plus, another very, very critical component to all of this would be the BI, which is the business intelligence part of it. That is all the reports that I can get out of this particular solution. Apart from this, some of the components that I have put down over here to keep in mind in the longer run would be things like CRM, my customer relationships management, loyalty programs, etc. And also some advanced solutions which would be required, maybe not upfront, but in the longer run from an expansion perspective, would be things like merchandising and assortment planning, as well as inventory forecasting, space planning, etc. These are a lot more sophisticated solutions, and typically they're also quite expensive. But yes, this is broadly the footprint that one would look at when deciding on a retail ERP. It's extremely critical to choose the right ERP, because again, the marketplace is completely fragmented in terms of there are so many solutions available over there, all of them in different technology platforms, each one claiming many things that they can do for your business, uh, backed by multiple kinds of vendors. So this it's quite challenging and it's quite confusing at times as to what do I choose. Uh, because any wrong decision can actually end up having you completely missing the point in terms of your investment, because if it is not adopted, say, internally by my employees, or if it is not really adhering to all my business requirements, if it is not allowing me to do my process execution in the right manner, or if it is not giving me the right kind of data, if it is not secure, etc., it will actually this would be sort of my investment down the drain. So what is the approach ideally that I should take to the ERP solution selection, so that I ensure I am more or less choosing the right ERP for my business? The first step, very important, would be to analyze my business, which is so some of the questions that you should be asking yourself is, what is my business model? Now, it could be, it can vary, right? I mean, you can have a business model which is typically centrally controlled, which is all the decisions are made at the center and they have to just flow down to the location level, which is at your store or at your warehouse level. All the decisions are completely centrally controlled. In this scenario, it has to, the system has to enable me to be able to take all the decisions centrally and then flow them down at the location level. Or I could have something which is locational control, so where I'm giving a large amount of control to my stores. They can make a lot of their decisions, and you are allowing them to do things at the store end itself. Or I could have a business model which is completely franchisee oriented. So I have very few own stores. I mostly have franchisee stores, in which scenario the kind of requirements that my business would have in terms of functionalities would be very different. So I need to keep in mind, first of all, I need to define what my business model is. Secondly, I have to also identify what my short term and long term plans are. So, for example, in the short term or in long term, what kind of expansion am I looking at? What are my strategic goals in terms of my top line and bottom line? So, this year I have done this much business. How much business am I going to do the next year and the next year and the year after that? I need to have that strategic plan in place. And apart from that, certain other key aspects that to keep in mind is, for example, am I aiming towards funding? Or am I aiming at selling my business after a point of time? These are very practical questions, but this need to be asked, because if I'm aiming towards funding, say, for example, I might need to have the right kind of solution for the investor to get interested in me, because they do keep in mind these kind of things when they are exploring the opportunity of funding your business. Apart from this, extremely important is to understand what is the capital available to me and how much am I willing to spend on my IT needs or ERP. Because at the end of it all, budget is very important. I need to keep in mind my costs and how much of that is available to spend at the end of it all, because we already discussed it is, as it is, my business is extremely capital intensive. I constantly need money for various things, so I need to keep a budget aside for this. What is the capability distribution of my manpower? What I mean to say here is, now, totally depending on what kind of business you're running, you could either have a very highly educated central workforce, which would adopt very easily to even the most sophisticated of the solutions, which are highly trained. Or I might have a high percentage of people which are mostly front end people who are not really computer savvy, who can be trained but would require a lot of hand holding. So this needs to be kept in mind. I need to understand what my manpower is like. Apart from that, I also need to understand what is the segment of business I am in, because depending on whether I'm a grocery or whether I'm a fashion retailer or whether I'm a hardlines guy, my requirements would vary. Because I mean, I would not get into too much of an explanation here, but we all understand that the way, for example, inventory is controlled in a grocery versus the way it is controlled in fashion, or the way assortment planning is done, is very, very different. Grocery is extremely replenishment driven, whereas fashion is extremely allocation driven. So each of these segments have their own specific needs, and I need to understand that which solution would best cater to my segment. Apart from that, very, very important to keep in mind, because all these are slightly generic, but now this is something which is very specific to you, which is what are the key pain areas that need addressing. Because at this moment, what is it that is keeping me behind, or which is actually a major pain area for me? For example, I might be ending up with a lot of extra inventory month on month. I might end up doing a lot of markdowns. Is it because of wrong inventory planning? If yes, then what it is that is the cause, and can this ERP solution address this pain point for me? Similarly, are there a lot of manual errors? Now, what happens many times is the data that I have available at the center might vary from the data that is available at the store. So there might be multiple data points, and hence I'm actually unable to take the right decision because I don't really know, I don't have a clear visibility. That's a pain area of my business at this moment, which needs to be plugged because it could have far reaching consequences. Um, Okay, finally, apart from all this that I need to keep in mind is what is my current technology setup as well as capability. So I might already have certain amount of IT which I'm using. First of all, yeah, do I have it? Don't I have it? Am I starting from scratch? Secondly, if I have it, what is my current technology setup and how geared is it towards taking on more responsibility and adapting to it and enabling my and empowering my people. Keeping all this in mind, now once I have my business analysis in place, I would put together the requirement guideline. Here, some of the very, very broad parameters that have to be kept in mind. Of course, that these need to be all further fine tuned and further defined. You actually need to come up with a proper, really well defined document which would put together all your requirements as well as the guidelines in terms of your solution selection. So, what should it have on a very, very broad level? It needs to have budget. First and foremost, I need to define my budget availability. And ideally, I should have a range instead of having a single number. I should have a range as to how much am I willing to spend within that range. You know, what is the low and the high limit, and then look at the solution fitment within that. Apart from that, and this is where a lot of detailing would need to be done, is what are the critical functionalities required. So depending on the segment of business I am in, as I already said, for example, if I'm a grocer, I need to definitely keep in mind whether it gives me all the various replenishment flexibilities, whether it is allowing me to do the relevant promotions, whether it is allowing me to, you know, do multiple pricing, zone-based pricing, etc. So depending on the segment of business I am in, there are certain functionalities that I might require. Similarly, depending on the business model I follow, as I already mentioned, whether I'm a franchisee oriented model or whether I actually do a lot of my purchasing on consignment basis, or if I'm allowing concessionaires within my business place. All these things, keeping in mind, there are certain functionalities that would be required. Similarly, key need and pain areas, we already went into the detail of this. I really would need to put down to the detail level what are the kind of functionalities that I definitely require. Apart from this, I also need to put a broad guidelines in terms of the desired technology. Now, some of the points to keep in mind here would be the fitment with the existing setup, because if I have an existing setup, ideally I would want to look at the synergies between the technology I have right now and the technology that I'm going to be investing into. Either that, or I could keep in mind that what is the desired technology platform that I want to move towards from an organizational perspective, because maybe what I have today is quite old and it may not be very conducive to keep on with it in the long term basis. In that scenario, I need to understand that from a futuristic perspective, what is the technology platform I should be in, and then accordingly make the change. Similarly, another thing to keep in mind is the ease of resource availability for the chosen technology, because at the end of it all, I need to not just buy it today, it has to be relevant to me from a long term perspective also, to make the most of my investment. And hence it will be very important to understand what is the kind of resource that is available and how easily it is available, as well as how um, costly or not expensive it is. Now, finally, another very important perspective, when I'm doing my purchasing, I definitely need to evaluate my partner as well. So it's always good to define the desired partner traits in terms of what is the kind of financial strength that the partner should bring in, because it will define how long term he's going to sustain in the market. How much of a domain expertise does this partner bring in? Because at the end of it all, I might be in this domain, but I might need somebody else to also handhold me through this whole process. So it is very important that my partner understands this domain, because it will also, to an extent, define the validity of this solution for me, not just from today's perspective, but also from the future perspective. And apart from that, a track record, yeah, it's always good to understand what's the track record of the partner. Now, once I have my requirement guidelines in place, we are ready for the final steps, which is the actual selection procedure. Typically, what will be my approach to the solution selection? First of all, now that I have these parameters in place, I would generate a short list of the solutions because there are so many vendors and solutions available out there. If I were to evaluate that many of them, it would be extremely consuming, as well as very, very confusing in the long run. So what I would ideally do is, first of all, generate a short list. How would I do that? One of the major parameter that most of you would be using would be the budget, because at the end of it all, these solutions are very, very broadly generally divided in terms of really expensive ones to not so expensive ones and the mid range ones. So, first of all, depending on your budget availability, you can shortlist your solutions set, which is going to be there for your consideration. One thing I would like to definitely but point out here is try to keep it a little diverse. So do not lean towards just one type of solutions or one type of vendors or one budgetary. Always try to include a bit of variety in terms of technology, in terms of budget, in terms of the kind of functional things that are available. Because again, as I said, in your solution set, you might have things which are, say, for example, completely retail ready to slightly retail ready to very, very generic. Try to keep some amount of diversity because it will allow you to understand what is available in the market and make a much more informed decision. Okay, now that I have my shortlist ready, I would get into the evaluation process. Ideally, always involve your functional team during the evaluation procedure because ultimately this is the people who are going to live with the solution. And if they are not, if they don't buy into the solution, it will be extremely difficult to make them adopt and use the solution in the long run. So always ideally use them while while evaluating your solutions. Mm, After the functional team evaluation, if the functional fitment seems right, then you can get into the technical viability understanding, and this ideally should be done along with the technical team because again these are the people who are going to maintain these solutions and manage it in the long run. Um, After these, understand the peripheral costs attached because typically when looking at budgetary constraints, you shouldn't just be looking at the upfront investment but also what are the additional investments that are required, because apart from the solution that you're going to purchase, you're also going to be investing in the hardware that will be required, into the implementation and the upkeep. You would have to invest into people which are required to upkeep this solution, etc. So always try and understand the peripheral costs attached. um, Apart from all this, one very important thing to keep in mind is, so most of these things I might keep in mind the as of now scenario, which is right now what is the functional fitment, right now what is the technical fitment and the investment required. But ideally, always try to understand the future roadmap from the perspective of functional, technical, and the investment, because this it's an extremely dynamic marketplace. The needs keep changing, legal requirements keep changing, customer needs keep changing, so my functionality has to keep up with it. Similarly, technology has to be pretty current because if I'm going to use old technology which is going to die down, I might have to junk this particular investment very soon and go for something else which is not really desirable. Similarly, investment is not just today, it also, I might have to get into costs of upkeep from the futuristic perspective. I should keep in mind what is my long term investment going to look like. Now, apart from all this, so once I have a solution fitment, I would evaluate the partner basis whatever criteria we already discussed, and then finally you negotiate and finalize. Now, the key points to consider during selection. Now, this is an extremely important one, which I would like everybody to really pay attention to. So, those were the broad parameters. Now, the key points to consider when I'm selecting an IT solution or an ERP solution for my business is one, how scalable is the solution? Because retail is a very data intensive kind of a business. I always have so many products that I need to stock. I always have so many customers. I have so many stores, multiple entities to manage. And there are many, many, many transactions that are happening on a daily basis. And moreover, if I'm going to grow or expand, my uh, data requirements would grow that many fold. So the solution has to be highly scalable because it needs to be able to manage that amount of traffic without slowing down, without dying out, and not just for today, but also keeping in mind for the next few years, it has to keep up with my pace of growth. The scalability, extremely important. Secondly, is the solution integrated across the various functions and various modules? Will it give me an integrated view of my multiple entities? Now, what happens is, so I have store, I have warehouses, I have central uh, head offices as well as branch offices. Now, within my head office, also, I might have multiple functions. I have merchandising, I have sourcing, I have planning, I have supply chain. Now, each one of them have their own specific requirements in terms of functionalities. Sometimes a single module caters to it, sometimes multiple modules cater to it. Definitely, we will have variable modules from the store and the central perspective. Now, what I need to really understand is it is all integrated, because if it has multiple data sets, then that's a problem because many times they may not match. And in that scenario, deciding which data set is correct is extremely difficult. It can actually hamper me from taking the right decisions. So it is extremely important. Also, what happens is many of the decisions at the store as well as central level are extremely interdependent. So if they do not have a common visibility, and if the data exchange is not instantaneous and integrated, that is a problem, because then a lot of manual intervention will happen, which is a problem. So again, very important that I have an integrated solution in place, ideally. Now, next point, would it give me accurate and on-time data visibility? Because data accuracy is one of the really key things, because at the end of it all, one of the very important reasons why I'm going to have an ERP is so that I have data availability. Manual data is highly unreliable, so I am going to rely quite a lot on my ERP to give me the right data. Right data is extremely important because that is what will enable me to take all my future business critical decisions. For example, if I have the right sales data, I know how much I have sold, how much I need, how much I need to order. Um, if I know what kind of monthly projections I have, I know how much to order from a futuristic perspective. If I have visibility to the various costings that I have from multiple vendors, then I can decide how to distribute my orders, etc. So, I mean, I can go on and on about this, but yes, the accurate data is extremely important, and also on time. Because if I know today, for example, that I have run out of something, I will be able to replenish it immediately. But if I get to know about it, say 3 days later, I might already have lost sales because the item is not available with me. So again, I cannot insist enough upon it that it's very, very important to have accurate and on-time data availability. So one has to keep this in mind when evaluating a solution. Would it eliminate manual intervention to a large extent? Now, this is one of the core reasons why anybody goes for automation, because we all understand manual intervention is highly error prone, and we want to eliminate it to as much degree as possible. How flexible and responsive is the solution? Will it adapt quickly to the ever evolving business, customer, legal requirements? So, as I said, right now, for example, say again, let's take Indian example. So today we have MRP. Now, this particular solution, does it take into account all my local and legal requirements? Or for example, that I need a certain amount of archiving of data, does the solution provide for that? And not just for from today's perspective, but also from futuristic perspective, is the solution flexible enough to change? How easy or difficult is it going to change my solution? For example, and also how responsive is it going to be? Because as I said, the customer is really uh, his mind changes all the time. He today he might require something, today he might require something else. Also, with the competition coming in, if they are providing something which I am not, I might actually lose my customer to the competition. Hence, I need to be extremely flexible and responsive so that I can adapt very, very quickly to the ever evolving needs. How user friendly is the solution? very, very important, because ultimately, typically, the large amount of your workforce is going to be the front end one, which is not necessarily very, very technology savvy. So if my, or for that matter, even people who are technology savvy, they still want something which is user friendly, because nobody wants to get into, intensive amount of training. Moreover, with the amount of people movement, you do not want to be investing hugely into training all the time. You want people to be updated and trained very quickly and just run with it. And so the how quickly I adopt, my workforce adopts to the solution is very important. So should be ideally very user friendly. Now look at the total cost of ownership, very important, because as we already mentioned, it's not just important to look at how much it's going to cost me today, but also how much it's going to cost me in the long run. And also, we should look at the total cost of ownership, not at just the cost of the solution. The solution might be cheap, but for example, if it is not on current technology, then I'm going to be junking it very soon. Not conducive, because then I will get into additional investment for buying a new solution. Moreover, I'll have to train all my people all over again, which will actually end up costing me a lot more in the long run. Similarly, what is the kind of hardware requirement? What is the kind of manpower required? Apart from that, another thing that I really need to keep in mind is how current is, what is the functional fitment of the solution for me? So, for example, if it's a cheap solution, but functionally it does not provide enough of functionality to me, that might mean that I might end up getting into a lot of customization. So, which is quite an expensive affair. So what we should be looking at ideally is that minimal customization. And even if I have to get into customization today or in future, what is the ease and cost of doing it? So yeah, total cost of ownership has to be looked into. Apart from that, how current is the technology? How easily are the relevant resources available? Will it address all my security concerns? So because it has to be extremely secure, I do not want the data to be going into the wrong hands. Moreover, from the current technology point of view, as I said, I don't want to be junking the solution in the long run, or I don't want to end up with something which is really outdated and then looking for resources for this outdated technology does not really make sense. So ideally, I should look at something which is very, very current and which is going to hold me good in the long run. Finally, looking at how committed is the vendor to maintaining solution, because it's not just about how dedicated he is to this particular thing today, but also in the long run. Because I've come across this many, many times where the solution is pretty decent, but there is nobody to maintain it because the vendor has already decided not to support it. They have moved on to something else, and that's a problem, because in the long run you need the solution to keep up with the changing needs. And for that, you need somebody who is at least committed to maintaining this solution as well as to support it in the long run. Plus, we also need to look at, does it have a defined upgrade path? Because as the environment changes, as my requirements change, if the solution has a defined upgrade path, it allows me to understand two things. One, that the vendor is at least dedicated to supporting this over the long run. And secondly, I would not have to get into understanding this needs in the future myself and then going on customizing it. What I know is that there is somebody who is already going to do all the understanding, thinking for me, all the developing for me, and at the minimal cost I will be able to keep up with the market. And finally, how updated is the team with domain understanding? Because ultimately it is very important that your partner is also uh, as knowledgeable with the domain, uh, because ultimately that will actually define the validity of the solution from today's perspective as well as tomorrow's perspective. And so finally, in conclusion, the right ERP is critical to your business. So make an informed decision and ultimately go for what works best for you.
Thank you, Pinky. I think that was really nice. You've covered the whole retail scenarios from selection to what are the criterias to be considered in terms of picking up
the right solution for your organization. Let us quickly get back to the questions. I think we have a lot of questions which has come in. Hey, thank you all participants. It's quite nice to see that we have a lot of questions here. We have evaluated around four retail products to replace our current software. Is it advisable to buy a completely web-based retail ERP software?
Well, it totally depends. As I said, this depends a lot on your business model as well as, I mean, so essentially, for example, if you are largely out of big cities where connectivity is not an issue, then you can probably go for a completely web-based retail software. But if you have problem with connectivity, or if you are in certain locations which are slightly remote and where you might face problems, then it may not be advisable to go with a completely web-based retail software. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're evaluating the solution, if even though it is web-based retail software, sometimes what can happen is that it allows you to work offline mode as well. If that is there, then yeah, fine. If they're supporting the offline mode, then probably it's you can go with it, but otherwise not probably.
Yeah, I think I agree to the point what Pinky mentioned here. It depends on the geography or the place from where your retail operations are actually running. And if you have uh, intermittent connectivity issues, then you definitely need to look at a product which can actually work online and offline and synchronize the data when it is offline. So I think that will be the key, because at the end of the day, all these systems should be able to consolidate and give you centralized information so that you can make the right decision. So yes, it's a key factor which we need to decide based on the connectivity to choose whether it should be a web-based or whether it should have both offline or online. Uh, Moving on. What is the difference between retail specific ERP and other ERPs? Can you give some examples of each?
Uh, as I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, typically a retail specific ERP is an ERP which has been built keeping in mind all the retail needs. Now, we all know that retail as a business is pretty unique and very different from other businesses, say, for example, manufacturing and things like that. Typically, a generic ERP is something which keeps in mind all the broad criteria of a business requirement, but see, the name itself says generic is basically something that can fit any business. So it does not have any specific industry requirements in mind. Also, it does not have any inbuilt processes which are specific to any industry. Uh, you can do all your broad operations, but it would not, you will really need to do a lot of changes before it will allow you to do all the retail functionalities. That is the main difference between a retail specific and a generic ERP. Uh, Essentially, you will have to get into a lot of building of the solution yourself, because in for a retail ERP kind of a thing, they have done most of the thinking for you. They have done the blueprinting. They have already built in the processes, keeping in mind what the requirements of the industry are. So yeah, I mean, and hence also, as I said, it would most likely be a little more easier to adapt as well as easier to deploy, or rather quicker to deploy, depending on the solution. So that is the main difference. Apart from that, examples, as in, am I supposed to give some of the names of the ERP solutions, or how is it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you have any specific retail products, specific retail ERPs.
yeah. So there are many. There are some retail specific ERPs that are in the market. Say, for example, there is Oracle Retail, there is SAP Retail, there is JDA, or All Data Gold. These are all retail specific ERP. For that matter, Sysfore Retail is another retail specific ERP. uh, whereas you have certain generic solutions, and or for that matter there are also certain vendors who build customized solutions, but that can be a very very expensive affair, and also it requires a lot of involvement also from
Yeah,
your side because you have to design it yourself.
yeah, I think I completely agree with Pinky on that. A retail ready solution helps in quickly implementing it rather than doing a lot of customization, and it will definitely lack a lot of standard business process and the best practices what is really required from a retail perspective. Okay, moving on. um, we have another question which says, how do you assess scalability of a solution? What do you ask the vendor to assess this?
Typically, when you assess the scalability of a solution, what you keep in mind is, say, for example, if there's a solution which has been implemented, you generally try to understand across how many stores it has been implemented. Also, how much of data transactions in a daily basis it is able to do. Within a minute, how many transactions it can do. So typically, if you are these are the kind of questions that you would ask the vendor as to what is the largest implementation, how much of footfall per store, how many stores across which the system is running, and also you might ask them as to how many per minute transactions the solution can handle without being erroneous.
Okay.
So that is also critical because I might be able to run many transactions, but if I'm giving errors or if I'm failing, then it's moot.
Okay, I think we need to quickly run on over this because there
Yeah,
are some very interesting questions.
sure.
One is about FDI in retail in India. Will that actually have an impact on me choosing the right ERP?
Yeah, to an extent, yes, because there are a couple of reasons why that would happen. One is with the FDI opening up, I will have a lot more competitors coming in to the market, right? So my marketplace is going to become a lot more dynamic, and most of these people who are going to enter the country typically would come armed with very very sophisticated solutions. Now, I would be kind of outdated if I do not match up to it. Now, that does not necessarily mean that I need to get into extremely expensive solutions, but I still should definitely keep myself updated and in the running.
Yeah, I want to add another point to this. When we say we have FDI in India, uh, what will happen is when the larger multinational companies, when they start interacting with the local retailers for different things, from sourcing to other alignments and sales and things like that, they will expect a lot of things to be done online or in a online format. So it is critical that most of these smaller retailers or mid-sized retailers to actually have the capability to adapt to such needs, in terms of sending POs as a in a online format, from sales orders to a lot of these documents has to be transferred online. So it is ideal for organizations to look at adopting the right retail solutions, because if they want to move ahead with the business advantages, yes, that is the way to go. um, there's another very interesting question. We are a small organization with currently 6 physical stores and planning for an e-commerce in the next year. We don't have huge budget to buy big ERP systems, nor we have internal capabilities. What are the key modules to start with if we are ready to do a phase-wise implementation approach?
Typically, obviously, the store system is a must. I have to have a store system in place because that is where I'm doing all my transactions.
Right.
But going beyond that, apart from that, it would be ideal that I start with at least master data management and merchandising operations because that will really help me control my business, and it will also help me keep in line all my operations, which will help me in expansion. And going forward, since you're planning for e-commerce, so yeah, keeping that in mind, eventually you will have to go for the a solution which is capable of integrating e-commerce as and when you decide to get into it.
Okay.
So these are the modules. So ideally, as I said, recapping it: store operations, merchandising operations, and BI. That is reports. So ideally, why I'm saying reports is because make sure that you have sufficient reports to, help
Yeah.
out.
Let's not use the word BI because BI will
No,
actually.
BI has different
Yeah, exactly.
implications. No, I agree.
So another question. We we are primarily an online retail business like Amazon or eBay. Does a retail ERP make sense for me? How will merchandising management help in this scenario?
Absolutely, it makes sense for you because even it is online or offline, it is still retail. So largely, a lot of operations that any retailer requires, you would need it to. I mean, I do need to do my merchandise management because at the end of it all, yeah, the business model is different. So the way I handle my inventory might be different, but I still do need to handle my inventory, right? Similarly, I do need to manage my orders, I mean, order management in terms of my PO purchasing. I need to do vendor management. I need to decide what to keep, what to sell, how much to keep if I am holding the inventory. All these is very common with the offline business. It's basically the differentiation is in the channel of selling. But my core operations are still the same. So, yes, it will make sense to have a merchandise management solution.
Okay, we I think we've got another 5 minutes. Let's just quickly take a few more questions. Where can I find the business analysis parameters for choosing a right retail solution? Is there anything available online, or can we get them through a partner or a vendor? I think
Uh,
this is more from selecting a right product and seeing whether we are capable of handling it.
Sure. See, I would like to think that some of this I kind of covered in my presentation, at
Absolutely,
least on
yeah.
a
That's what I'm
broad
thinking.
level.
But maybe I think you should just
So,
summarize.
so yes, as I said, there are a whole list of questions that I have put in there. If you like, we can share it with you. But if you want to look for a much more detailed one, and let me tell you, I have come across some really detailed RFPs. Some of them are available online, but sometimes over analysis also is like analysis paralysis kind of a thing.
Yeah,
So
I think for this question, if you still need some assistance on this, please send us an email
and yeah,
to
we'll be
info at
able to sort out.
sysforeretail.com. We could definitely help you with this.
Yeah.
I'm a small business owner looking to expand into different cities, and I'm finding that my current solution cannot handle my requirements. How do I go about upgrading to a better solution? And what would be the most important factor for a company like us?
Again, I
I
think I
think
have
we have broadly
broadly
covered
covered
this,
this.
yes.
Broadly covered this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've covered this. As Pinky mentioned earlier, uh, from looking at the solution, more than solution, we need to look at the operational regions where your current retail business is running. And then based on that, you need to look at what kind of a system is required. And then from an operation perspective, yes, you definitely require, master data management, uh, mechanizing, purchase, inventory, all those standard critical modules as she mentioned earlier. Okay. There is a lot of talk on barcode, RFID, etc. in retail. Does an ERP have functionality to handle these? How does it work in a scenario if your vendors are not using an ERP? I think this is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they mean by your vendors are not using
See,
it?
for example, when you trade with different
Oh, yeah, yeah,
sourcing,
suppliers.
the
Right.
suppliers,
Got
the
it. Got it.
supplier
Yeah, yeah,
doesn't
yeah, yeah.
actually
Sure, sure,
have
sure.
compliance in place.
Right. Well, yeah, and ERP should ideally have a functionality to handle this, especially barcode, because RFID is everything said and done still not as prevalent as one would. The amount of talk that you hear, but honestly, RFID is not yet that prevalent because of the cost of RFID at the moment. But yes, it will be great if the ERP can handle it. But even if not, from a small and medium business perspective, it should definitely be able to handle barcode. That is critical. And if your vendor is not using an ERP, I don't think that should really be a problem because ultimately you define your own barcode. So either you have a barcode which is predefined, otherwise your ERP can generate a barcode for you which can be attached by you and you can use it still.
There is a similar question. I am a food and beverage franchisee owner, and it would be nice to have a menu taking system that also synchronized with my core system. So, with the advent of handheld devices and the ease of use, are there solutions available that can sync up front end and help meet my needs?
Yes, definitely there are solutions available for this, because there are certain solutions which do provide menu taking and order taking kind of a solution, which directly will, integrate to your kitchen order taking, the KOT, etc. In fact, if I'm not wrong, Ajit uh, would say
Yeah,
Sysfore has something like this.
Sysfore Retail has a uh, handheld or smart device solution, which is purely designed for F&B industry. We currently handle operations of QSR, dine-in, and takeaway kind of model. So, if you would have want to take a look at our solution set, please send an email to info@sysforeretail.com. I will be happy to demonstrate that solution. This is completely integrated with the backend system. So the backend system will do the primary billing, and also it has a integrated kitchen monitoring platform as well. Let's take the next question. Uh, we don't have huge IT budget, but we are keen to adopt an ERP system for our complete integrated operations. Is open source ERP solutions advisable for us retailers?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. An open source can be actually a pretty good fitment because, as we all know, open source is comparatively easier to adopt and also comparatively low cost. So yes, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Pinky has mentioned, Sysfore Retail is one of the softwares which is built on a complete open source platform. We use the open source framework, and we have built all these retail ready modules which are available uh, for any customers for a quick implementation. And uh, to in terms of answering to your concern, uh, this is a completely supported solution implementation what Sys4 Retail provides. We give all our customers complete support post implementation and ongoing AMC as well. So, like any other product out there in the market, you can get an assured uh, support, assured uh, enhancements and warranty support for all your ongoing or upcoming requirements as well. Um, there is a tricky question. We are a small retail apparel company with around 10 stores. Is there a process to analyze our organization and conclude whether we are ready for an ERP implementation?
Yes, definitely. In fact, some of the parameters that I had put in place on that slide where I spoke about analyzing your business, uh, that broadly kind of covers this particular thing that you're asking. You can further, of course, add more specific questions and see, as I said, what your current technical capabilities are, or what your manpower looks like, and etc. But typically, I mean, honestly speaking, at a 10 store kind of a thing, it is ideal to at least start with the process. Because as you grow, and especially if you're looking at growing, as you grow, it will be more and more difficult to handle the operations without an ERP in place. So I would say it's the right time for you to start this evaluation.
Picky from my
Yeah.
experience in the retail industry, what I have seen is yes, the organization should actually have internal capability
Right.
to adopt any new system. That is
Yeah.
one. Secondly, there is a critical top management buy-in, which is really required. So
Absolutely.
these two things are primary before you actually look at any analysis of your current organizational setup.
Not only that, I mean, even if I do it at the end of it all, if I have a buy-in in terms of that I want to go for it, then yes, this analysis will help me in terms of how ready I am, and even if I'm not ready, then what is the kind of steps I need to take to get ready.
Yeah.
So the question here is not whether I should be going for the ERP or not. That I would say yes, you should be. Just the question you have to ask yourself is how ready I am, and if I'm not, what should I do so that I get ready?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we will have to take maybe only one more question. Uh, Maybe we'll take two last two questions. The rest we will actually try to, respond to the participants directly at a later time because we are absolutely running short of time. Is there an average lifespan for an ERP? When we buy an ERP, how long will it be useful for us? This is to help in assessing our ROI. I think this is a
Um,
valid question.
yeah. See, average lifespan, as in there is no any set answer to this. But yes, what I would definitely say is that you should look at a period of nothing, anywhere between 5 to 7 years for sure, ideally, because we do not have unlimited resource and money availability to keep junking the solution every 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. So ideally, we should look at something which will hold me good in the range of 5 to 10 years for at the minimum.
Yep. Okay. That's with that, I think we'll have to sum up this first of the Resource for Retail Education webinar series. Once again, I thank all the participants and apologize for the initial hiccups. Thank you, Pinky, for the wonderful session. We hope to hear from you in more sessions and in our future webinar series. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.